So, my message is very simple. And the message is, or request to all of you is, please don't waste your life. That's a simple message. Because human life is special. And Upanishads, they say, Utishtha, Jagrita, Prape, Varan, Nibodhata. It's a famous saying in the Vedas. Awake, arise, realize, and meet. Varan means meet or accept God or divinity in your life. Allow divine to enter your life. That's the message of all spiritual, all religious, all teachings, in past, present, or maybe future. So message is very simple. The message is try to understand God, try to love Him, and try to be loved by Him. See this word not by your own eyes, by the eyes of God. And if we can do that, that's a perfection of human life. And the only difference between animal and human is animals can eat, we eat. Animals can sleep, we sleep. Animals can do sex, we can do as human species. And ahar nitra bhai mathunam sha. And animals can fear, they have fear, they can defend themselves. We also defend ourselves, but in a different way. A dog, if he wants to defend himself, he can bark, or it can bark. We defend ourselves in a subtle way by earning money. So money helps us to defend our prestige and status, or probably by making status quo in the society. These are all defense mechanisms in humans. So all these are same. We are doing the same thing. But there is one difference. Ahar nidra bhai mathunam sya samanam etat pashubhi naranam. This is in Mahabharata. They are same, but there is one difference. Difference is humans can inquire, who am I? Animals cannot. You don't find any symposium or conference of animals discussing, who am I? That's not possible for them. That's not possible for them. Animals can die for other animals. Other traits are there. Martyr, humans can die for. Animals can also sacrifice themselves. But this question, who am I and who is God, these animals cannot ask. So this talk, I'm going to try to present to you how precious is human life and what we are supposed to do in this human life. So there are when I say that aim of human life is to understand God, love Him, and be loved by Him, there are many questions. Many questions will come in your mind. Who is God? First of all, why should I believe in God? Who am I, by the way? And what is love? What is religion? Is it superstition? What is spirituality? All these questions will arise in your mind. What should I do? What is the purpose of human life? Why I am born? Should I accept what society says? Or should I accept what saints say to us? Or should I lead my life according to my own opinion or my own mind? There's so many questions. There's so many questions. After hearing this message, where's a solution? To whom should we go for these questions? Science? Not exactly. Because science doesn't have answers to all these questions. In fact, science, long ago, at least 100 to 150 years back, at the time of Enlightenment, Renaissance, or maybe 300 years back, whatever, science gave all these questions as a gift to philosophers. You handle. Who is God? It's to you. Who am I? Forget this. What is love? Love is not quantifiable. No, you can't do anything with love. What is love? You can say, well, brain secretes a hormone, dopamine or endorphins, which can create euphoria. That's okay, but then it can increase your level of happiness and love. But what is love? That science cannot answer. It can't even begin to answer these questions. Science can help us to understand a little bit about epistemology. That means what is knowledge, and how do we know what do we know? How do we know what we know is correct? Okay, evidence. Science can a little bit help us to understand logic. What about aesthetics? Beauty. That's aesthetics. And love. What to do with this? Feelings, science says forget it. Forget it. It's for artists. It is for stupid people. We are rationalists. We are scientists. Everything has to be explained logically. And what about ethics, morality? Science cannot help you to understand what to do, what not to do. It can give you Apple iPhone, but what to do with it, you have to decide. It cannot tell you. In fact, if science could have charted out exactly what to do, what not to do, there would not have been any Hitler in our history. He was there. He used scientific concepts, eugenics. Everybody knows this, and you know what happened. So there are certain domains science cannot answer. In fact, it is not scientific to say that we can understand everything through science. That's a faith. That's faith. That we can understand everything. In fact, we can understand everything because, first of all, this statement itself is logically wrong. We can understand everything because you cannot understand everything because you don't know how much is everything. That's another point there. How do you know that we have understood everything? Because first you have to know what is everything. So science has a limited function. It has helped us to give technology so many things. But these questions, it cannot help us. It cannot give answers to this. What is death? What happens after death? What is purpose of life? What to do with these questions? Should we forget them? Should we leave them around and lead our lives as we are living, as we are leading our lives, and how does it matter? But no, these questions are essential to all of us. If you don't find answers to these questions, which are in fact related to our life, can you please silence your cell phones, all of you, if it's my request? That's okay. I'm just asking everybody else. So, in fact, these questions are integral to a life. No. Science can give you gadgets, but gadgets are not related to your life. That we have made these gadgets as necessity. It's not necessity. Breathing is necessary, not iPhone. Food is necessary, not your car. So first we should talk about your mind is necessary, not all these things we see. So first we should solve these questions. What is mind? What is life? And in fact, interestingly, although science has been trying to avoid these questions as metaphysics or as philosophers to them, interestingly, as much as science was trying to avoid these questions, it is forced to talk on these questions now in this postmodern age. In fact, consciousness was a subject of people used to talk about consciousness 100 years back. They would instantly be outcasted from academic community. Nobody would talk to them. Just, come on, he's talking about consciousness. And consciousness was actually a derogatory word, at least in its strict scientific academic word, not in philosophical word. And it was called as a C word, the nasty C word. That's what they used to talk. But things are changing because everybody knows with quantum mechanics, consciousness is in. Physics has to deal with consciousness. Although they're trying to avoid it, they're trying to do calculations, whatever. But They are coming face to face with consciousness. Scientists are not talking with philosophers. What to do with this? Neurologists. They are coming face to face with this consciousness. What is consciousness? You have to talk about consciousness. The more you're studying brain, you have to talk about consciousness. So all these things are there, and but these questions of meaning of life, purpose of life, what we have to do, this science cannot answer. So where do we get these answers? You can get these answers in the Vedas, in the Upanishads, in philosophical tradition, which have been coming along so many years, 5,000 years, 6,000 years. And in that philosophical tradition, which is found in the Vedas and Upanishads, they talk about these questions. And they try to give you these answers. In fact, Vedas have been praised by so many people, not Indians, not Eastern philosophers, but even Western philosophers. For example, Schopenhauer, German philosopher, I don't know whether he's a very famous philosopher. 1786 to 1860. He said, Schopenhauer said that Vedas and Upanishads is the highest fruit of human knowledge, and the conceptions of Upanishads are so concise and so precise that you can't help thinking it cannot be a product of mere mortals. It has to come from somewhere else. Vedas have been praised by, for example, by Louis Jacoli. He's a scientist. 1926. He wrote a book, Bible of India. He wrote a book, Louis Jacoli, and he said he was a French scientist, and he said in his book, all sciences began in Upanishads. In fact, if you read Vedas and Upanishads, you'll find it is full of scientific concepts. I've also presented a seminar on this. I've been doing research for the last 15 years in Vedas and Upanishads, and you find science is not just from Western origin. It is all the concepts are there. For example, maths is there in Ganit Jyotish. You see Jyotish, or you go to Pandits, they read your hands, astrology. But there's a branch of Jyotish, Ganit Jyotish, which talks about maths. Calculus is there in Sulba Sutras. These are all branches of Vedas, various books. Veda is not a one book, it is a collection of books. You find chemistry in the Rasayan Shastra, you find biology in Ayurveda, you find military science in Dhanurveda, you find entertainment, music in Gandharveda, you find poetry in Alankar Shastra, you find architecture in Sthapatya Veda. It's talking about science, but it is also talking about more important things which are related to our life. That's more important. It is Upanishadic and Vedic tradition to talk about life first and then second other things. It is a Vedic tradition to talk about what is inside, not what is outside. In fact, Bhagavad Gita says, one who is satisfied within, he is really satisfied. That's real satisfaction. And that is what Vedas talk about. But anyway, Professor Mikhail Mikhailov, if you can go and Google that. He is a Belarusian scientist. In 2005, he wrote a book, Key to Vedas, and he showed that Vedas, the aphorism of Vedas, it is almost like computer codes, and all these theorems, Pythagorean theorem, and all these theorems. In fact, Chomsky, Chomsky, father of computer language. He's talking about computer language. He was a computer linguist, and he said all computer languages. In fact, the concept of computer languages is coming from Sanskrit Panini. Panini is a Sanskrit book. So all sciences are coming from Vedas and Upanishads. There have been researches going on in India, in Russia, about all these things. But the point is, if you want to understand material science or spiritual science, okay, these are the books you have to go and read and research and discuss. But the point is, it's very cumbersome to read Vedas. It's very difficult because anybody has seen Vedas here? Anybody has seen, at least seen, not read? That's okay. There are 4 books: Rig Ved, Yajur Ved, Athar Ved, and Sam Ved. There are 4 collection of 4 books. And then there are Upavedas: Dhanur Ved, Ayurved, Gandhar Ved, and then there are Sharangas. There are 6 books more. Vedas are written in codes. So to decode that books, you need some system to decode it. And those decoding system is given in 6 books: Shiksha, Kalp, Vyakaran, Nirukt, Jyotish, and Chanda. 6 books. So to understand Vedas, to talk about these questions about life, you have to read Vedas, 4 books, 6 books, 10 plus 4 books more, 14 books. And for that you might have to learn Sanskrit. To learn Sanskrit you need minimum 12 years. That's bad news. Minimum 12 years. You can't read Sanskrit like that. You can read translations of Vedas in English, but those translations are complete crap. I'm not saying. I don't say that. Schopenhauer said that. Schopenhauer, German philosopher, is very intelligent, and he said most of the translations, English translations, they are like translations done by kids, school-going boys. Because you can't translate Vedas just by learning Sanskrit and English. You have to be evolved in your consciousness to understand what that text says. Every verse of Vedas have 1,000 meanings, 1,000 layers of meanings. And that's how much evolved you are, you can understand that there. It depends on our consciousness. So what to do? You can't read Vedas. You have to spend your whole life. You don't have time now. Time is a problem. So that is why 5,000 years back Gita was spoken, Bhagavad Gita. And Bhagavad Gita, it is 18 chapters, 700 verses. It's a small book. You can say Bhagavad Gita is like a compendium or like a synopsis of Vedic knowledge. Entire Vedic knowledge put into 700 verses, 18 chapters. And it is accepted throughout East, all traditions. Everybody accepts Bhagavad Gita is summary of all Vedic scriptures. It is said in Bhagavad Gita, Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogda Gopal Nandana Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Amritam Mahat. If you make a cow of Vedas and if you milk it, that milk is Bhagavad Gita. And that is why all Western philosophers, physicists and scientists, everybody has praised. Who has not praised Bhagavad Gita? From Mahatma Gandhi, I'll just read to you. From Mahatma Gandhi, he said, when doubts haunt me, when disappointments stare me in the face, and I see one ray of hope on the horizon, I turn to Bhagavad Gita. Aldous Huxley, he was a pacifist and a writer, American. He said, Bhagavad Gita is the most systematic statement of spiritual evolution. These guys are telling. It's not some Baba or some. These are not like small guys. Henry David Thoreau. He said, he was American author, poet, philosopher. Thoreau, everybody knows. He said, in the morning I bathe my intellect in the stupendous philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, in comparison with which a modern word and its literature seems puny and trivial. Wilhelm von Humboldt, he was a Prussian philosopher, was quite famous. He said, Bhagavad Gita is the most beautiful, perhaps the only true philosophical song existing in any known tongue. Albert Schweitzer, German physician, medical missionary to India, he said, Bhagavad Gita has a profound influence of spirit of mankind by its devotion to God. Hermann Hesse, German Swiss poet, he said, this is interesting, marvel of Bhagavad Gita is its truly revelation of life's wisdom, which enables philosophy to blossom into religion. And finally, Vedas themselves praise Bhagavad Gita. Vedas, they themselves praise Bhagavad Gita. Atharvaveda, it is said in Atharvaveda, that fool who wants to attain liberation, who wants to understand the aim of life by constant spiritual practice, without hearing the wisdom of Gita, is fit to be laughed at even by a child. So, Bhagavad Gita is not a is not a Hindu book. It's not a sectarian book. It's a manual of life. And please make it a point to read Bhagavad Gita at least once in your life. Have a look what's there. At least in Western world, it's a new thing, but at least for Indians, all of you. We all know Bhagavad Gita. We have all heard about Bhagavad Gita, but I don't think so anybody has read Bhagavad Gita as a law book. That's a law book, manual of life. That is what is said in Bhagavad Gita itself. It's a manual of life. Without this manual, we can't lead life properly. We'll not be able to understand these questions. What is purpose of life? What should I think? That's a good question. What should you think? Can you think anything? Whatever comes in your mind? No. You have to train your mind. You train your thoughts. So spirituality is training. It's training. That I'll talk in a minute. Spirituality is not just some naive or some deep experience of flying in air, experience of nothing. I don't know how that will happen, but that's said like that, experience of nothing. But it's not like that. Spirituality is training of thoughts, of feelings, and of your actions. Thinking, feeling, and willing. When you train them properly, then you know what to do, when to do, why to do, how to do. And then you can make your life peaceful, happy, happiness and peaceful. That's called success. And then you can help others. If you're not yourself contented, how can you pass on peace to others? No, it's not possible. So that's Bhagavad Gita. And this book can tell you what to do in life. Just like suppose if you buy a car, or if you buy an instrument, or if you buy a new gadget launched just today, and you don't get manual, how do you operate it? You don't know how to operate it, no? You don't know how to operate. You can probably eat it. That you can do. If you give a cell phone to a child, what will he do? He just put in mouth now. That's what he's going to do. So that's what we are doing. We are eating our own life. We are not living life. We are spending life. There's a difference. We have to live our life. Live our life in a perfect way, so that we can make our life perfect and make others' life perfect. Make our life perfect like God, who is perfect. That's what we are meant to do here. That's why we are born here. So these questions are answers to these questions are given in Bhagavad Gita. Is Bhagavad Gita religion? Yes and no, both. If you talk of religion in the sense of religion, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, some ism, then that's not. If you talk of religion in the sense of dharma, this word, as a duty, then yes, Bhagavad Gita is religion. Bhagavad Gita will tell you what's your duty at the level of social level, personal level, and spiritual level. All these three levels you have to understand. What's my proper duty? How should I behave? How should I think? How should I commute with divine? How should I behave personally? All these things have to be trained. So that's Bhagavad Gita. Is it spirituality? Again, answer is yes and no. No, because the sense of spirituality in modern world, especially in America, it's a different thing. Spirituality is most of the sense of spirituality is something mystic, something undefinable, abstract. That's what we mean by spirituality. But then in that case, no. But if you talk of spirituality in terms of training soul, mind and body, yes. Is Bhagavad Gita science? Again, answer is yes and no. If you talk of science as dealing only with matter, only with physical things, then no. If you talk of science as dealing with physical things and consciousness, and those things which science has not yet understood, then of course yes. So how does Bhagavad Gita give answers to all these questions? There's so many questions now. Who is God? Why is God? What should I do? All these questions. What is purpose of my life? All these questions, whatever is there in your mind, all these doubts, that's genuine to have doubts. It's not wrong. But all those questions can be summarized into 3 questions. That's all. And those 3 questions are not, it's not that only Bhagavad Gita raises questions. Many philosophers, independently, by thinking, they came to at least questions. They didn't find answers, but they came to questions. Like Nietzsche. Nietzsche, he came to these questions. Or maybe Ludwig Wittgenstein. He came to this question. He said, there are just 2 questions worth asking. Who am I? Who is God? All other questions are not worthwhile. Because there are so many questions in this world. You can keep on asking questions. You can do a research on this. You can do a research on hair. You can spend a whole life analyzing hair. You can do that. That's good or bad, that's another thing. But you can do that. But there are some questions which has to be solved. Who am I? If you don't know who are you, how do you live? If suppose for example, all of you lose your memory now. Amnesia. You know amnesia? You forget yourself. What's going to happen? Will you be happy?
No.
Everybody go crazy here. Who am I? You can't sit properly. You will not be able to sit. No matter how many gadgets you have. You can't do anything with that. You'll be in anxiety. Or if you're lost in a forest. Come on, you are anxiety. So similarly, if you don't know who are you, no matter how much you try to make yourself happy, it's impossible to be happy. You can't be happy. You've forgotten yourself. And that is why you see in this modern world, we are trying to be happy. We are scriptures give an example of a sugar cane. So you have seen how in India you have seen how they take out sugar cane juice. Here in America, how do they do? They have machines like that. Same. So you take sugar cane, you put in the machine, and there's juice, and then that person will again fold it and put it in the machine. Again, there's some juice, and then that person is about to throw. The assistant will come on. Again fold it once more. We put it in the machine again. And they put it in the machine again some juice, and they try to extract some juice. But finally, there's no juice. That's what we are doing. In fact, we have lost the balance. The society has lost balance. We all have lost balance. And nobody is there to guide all of us. We are trying to be happy, but you cannot be. It's impossible. That is why scripture says, Nunam pramatta kurute vikarma. That our situation is like an insane person who doesn't know who is he, but is trying to do so many things without knowing who is he, and it's impossible to be happy. This example is good, no? It's a very good example. So that is why scripture says, Uttishta Jagrita. First understand who are you. That is why Bhagavad Gita, it begins with this knowledge. Who are you? Arjuna denies to fight in Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna says, I don't want to fight. Everybody knows battle scene. So Bhagavad Gita begins with a battle scene. Arjuna is supposed to fight. Arjuna says, I don't want to fight. And Arjuna asks Krishna, should I fight? Should I not fight? Krishna says, Arjuna, you first forget fight. Understand who are you. If you don't understand who are you, what's the point of fighting? Even if you win, still you don't know who are you. What's the point of that? So this is an insane condition. And that is why Upanishads and Vedas say everybody is insane. Everybody who doesn't solve these questions, they're practically insane. Who am I? This is the question. And Bhagavad Gita, this Ludwig Wittgenstein, he came to this conclusion. Who am I? Who is God? Now, so scriptures, Bhagavad Gita says there are just 3 questions worthwhile asking. Who am I? Who is God? And what is the aim of life? It is said, due to want of aim of life, we are unsatisfied. You don't know what we are supposed to do. So if you take fish out of water, it cannot be happy now. No matter how much good food you give, whatever you do. And that is why you see, you close your eyes, sit in a room, see inside you. You will find a lacuna there. You will find it. There's an emptiness within all of us. There's a black hole in all of us. And probably we don't want to face that. We don't want to face it. Because if we face it, probably we might we'll become frightened. There's a lacuna in me, there's an emptiness in me. And we'll get devastated. So the obvious solution for this, what we do is, what modern society offers is, okay, go for shopping. That's what you have to do. Don't face reality. Don't look inside. Go for shopping. Okay, just distract yourself. See television. See WhatsApp. See Facebook. Keep on doing something. That's the solution. But that's not solution. That's avoiding the problem. That's not solution. That is not explaining the problem. That is explaining away the problem. You're not facing. And if you don't face the problem, it's not that problem doesn't exist. It is there. Whether in this life or next life, you have to solve this. You have to encounter this emptiness or lacuna, these questions which are there in your mind, and you have to get a solution sometime or the other. So these three questions are there. So how does Bhagavad Gita solve these three questions? Who am I? Who is God? What is the aim of life? Okay, who am I? This is the first question. If I ask you, who are you? Most usual answer is, I am Mrs. This, I am Mr. This. That's the most usual answer. But Bhagavad Gita says that, well, you're not Mr. This, Mrs. This, because your name can change, no? Your name can change. You can keep your name Tom, Dick, Harry, or you can change your name. So you're not your name. You're not your name. So Bhagavad Gita begins like this analysis. And then Bhagavad Gita gives a beautiful knowledge, beautiful understanding. You're not even this body. And second chapter, 13th verse, Bhagavad Gita says, Dehinosmi netha dehe kaumaram yobnam jara tata dehantar prapte dhira satra namo yati. Our body is changing every moment. Even science has now found out, after every 7 years, each cell of a body will be different. Even brain cell. Previously we used to believe neurons, they don't change. But now science says, after every 7 years, all cells are different. In fact, every second your cells are changing, no? After 120 days, blood cells will die, they'll become new. Liver cells, probably 5 years. Bone cells, something. And then after 7 years, you are totally different, but yet you're same. No. It's a very beautiful logic. And science is now trying to grapple this question. How is it possible? This is called as self-continuity. How can we maintain this self-continuity in spite of the fact everything is changing in our body? This is interesting logic. This is the first verse of Bhagavad Gita. First verse means second chapter, 13th verse. It's not Dharma Kshetra, Kurukshetra, from where Krishna starts speaking. This wisdom. It's so simple to understand, no? This means we are something else. We are not this cells and body. Another thing, Bhagavad Gita says, Vashamshi jirnani yatha vihaya navani grinani naro parani. This is Sanskrit. But what it means is, we are changing our bodies, but yet experience is the same. And there's a scientist, there's a philosopher, David Chalmers. He's a big, you might not be knowing, but he's a philosopher, conscious studies. He has raised a very interesting point, which has brought consciousness again back into scientific field. And his question is, what is experience? Now, what is consciousness? It is experience, no? The function of consciousness is experience, is it? Your eyes cannot experience. It is dead flesh. What about your brain? Does brain experience? People like to say that functionalist, monist, that's a trend. But the question is, how can dead cells and chemicals, they can experience something? It's not possible. So Thomas Nagel, he's a philosopher, he said, he wrote a book. How does bat feel? So can you ever know how does bat feel? Can you ever understand bioscience? By anything, you apply all rules, all logic. can you tell us how does bat feel within himself? Is it possible? No. We forget bat. Can you tell how I am feeling, all of you sitting? Can you tell? You do my brain scan, can you tell? It's not possible. Because that's my experience. That is my experience. Experience is subjective. It is close to this word. No. Science is objective. So nobody can tell. And that experience is consciousness. That is different from brain cells, chemicals. Dead cells cannot produce experience. Dead cells cannot produce feelings. Dead cells cannot produce love. Although scientists may like to say that, but it's not possible. In fact, Ray Kurzweil, he's a computer scientist, and he says he's an atheist. So he said, in next 10 years, your Mac will be conscious. That's his projection. But again, there are deep questions there. How can dead cells experience something? No, it's not possible. So that's who am. It is very simple to understand. We are consciousness. We are different from this body. Our childhood photograph is different now. Is it? Our old photograph is different. Your bodies are changing, but you are same. Okay, fine. So when you get up in the morning, are you anytime puzzled? Maybe I'm somebody else. Anybody like that? No. You feel that you are you, no? That I doesn't change. I. When you were 2-year child, I was same. Now I is same. After 100 years, I is same. That continuity is there. Why? So there's this beautiful logic. Another logic which Bhagavad Gita is giving. Sometimes you need common sense to understand, not science. You apply common sense. Another logic Gita is giving. Okay, let me ask you. Why do you feel that you want to remain young? Why do you feel you want to remain young? Any answers? Why do you feel like that? Why doesn't anybody feel, I want to become old. I'm dying to become old. Nobody like that, no. Nobody. I'm so excited to become old. No. Even a 80 years old person, he will have no hairs, but he will feel as if he's young, and probably he'll go for hair transplant and something. I don't know what they'll do here. But everybody feels young. Why? Why don't you want to die? Why don't you want to die? Why don't you all just be excited? Yes, I'll die one day and it's so nice to die. No. Nobody, if anybody says like that, he's completely insane. No. In fact, there's no psychiatric disease like that where you are excited to die. There's no even insane condition where you're excited to die. It's not like that. So why? And why do we feel that we want to be happy? Why don't you feel you want to be unhappy? Well, that's a nice question, no? Everybody wants to be happy, no? Everybody wants to make at least that is a priori assumption. We want to be happy. So you understand a priori assumption? You have to accept axiomatically. You want to be happy, but there's a question. Why do you want to be happy? Why there's no person around you? Actually, I want to be unhappy, Actually, I'm very sad that I'm so happy. Nobody says like that. Why? Because, Bhagavad Gita answers, because this is characteristic of soul. Soul in Sanskrit is Sat Chit Anand. It is eternal. That concept of eternality, I don't want to die, that is in soul. That is in consciousness. That will never finish. That will never die. You'll change bodies, but you'll continue. That concept of finding happiness, that is there in soul. So simple to understand. Brain cells cannot have this intention, no. Brain cells cannot decide, I want to be happy. No chemical then decide. In happiness you can have hormones, but who decides I want to be happy? Who decides? Why not sorrow? So all these questions, these Vedic tradition, Bhagavad Gita raises these questions, and they're interesting questions. If you give a thought to them, it is an inescapable conclusion that we are not this body. We're not this body. In fact, it's very easy to understand you're not this body. You close your eyes, you sit in a room, And what do you feel? Do you feel you are a bag of organs? Do you feel like that? Anybody? Anybody here? Bag of organs? Organ. Anybody feels like that? You sit in a room, oh my God, I am so heavy, I am having heart and a liver and a kidney. Whew. And so many intestines. How many feet long? Some 7 feet long, some so cramped up. You don't feel like that, no? It's okay, it's nice. It's nice. You don't feel like that. You don't feel like a bag of organs. Why? And it is not just a problem in philosophy, it is a problem in science. It is a problem with psychologists. This is called as self-identity problem. Oneness of identity problem. People are struggling with these questions. People are struggling with these questions with no answers. And Bhagavad Gita gives an answer to this, a possible answer to this, that you don't feel like that you are full of organs, because you're not this organs. You're not this body. If you were this body, you would have felt that you're full of so many things. Well, you're not this. You're different from this. So you don't feel like that. You just have consciousness of external, your limbs. Even in your limbs, you don't have consciousness of your bones and blood vessels. You have consciousness of your form. No form? You have consciousness of your form. You have a self-image in your mind. That's it. Nothing more than that. Why? Who knows that? So, because you're not this body. You're not this body. So simple logical answers. This is in 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. You can imagine what's there in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. This Krishna in Bhagavad Gita develops this logic. That is why I request you to please read Bhagavad Gita at least once in your life. That is a manual of life. If you don't read that, it's very difficult to make any sense out of this word. It is very difficult to make. For example, just like 100 years back, all these biologists and zoologists, they were saying it is very difficult to make sense of all the animal kingdom. So many species. But then with the coming of evolution theory, now it makes sense. It's very difficult to make sense of anything in animal kingdom without the theory of evolution. Similarly, it is very difficult to make sense of anything in this world or about yourself without the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita. It's almost impossible. You will be super confused. There will be so many contradictory ideas floating around all of you and hearing so many people. It's so confusing. So who am I? We are soul. We are consciousness, and consciousness is separate from body, and consciousness needs some container. If you have sunlight, you have sun. If you have consciousness, you need a source of consciousness. And because consciousness is different from body, the source must be different from body, and that you call as soul or Atma or whatever. So, we can keep that. Thank you. Who am I as soul? Okay, fine. But here's the problem. You're soul, okay, good. Your consciousness, different from this body. But suppose I ask you, who are you? And if you say, I am man. Ask you, who are you? Okay, fine. You say, I am man. Or somebody say, I am woman. Is it a complete description of yourself? No. I would like to ask, okay, what's your name? Where do you live? No, that's a complete description. So just to say that I am soul, that's not a complete description of your entity. That's so that's a very general description. I am male, female, but we need specific description, and that is given by Bhagavad Gita. The specific description of soul is spirit. Soul is part and parcel of Supreme Spirit. It is part and parcel of Supreme Spirit. You see, that is what Bhagavad Gita says. Mamayvamsha jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manashasthani indriyani prakritisthani karashyati. We are all part and parcel of Supreme Spirit, Divine, or God. But presently we are struggling with this mind and with these senses. We are struggling with it. That's what we are. So, who is God then? That's another question. What is Supreme Spirit? Who is God? Does He exist? Should we believe in Him? That's another question. And that's also very simple to understand. Bhagavad Gita 5th chapter, it raises this question and answers this right there. And it's very simple to understand God exists. There's no problems in that. For example, I was just quoting that. Science likes to say there's no God, everything is come by chance, or there's a big bang, creation, but I was just mentioning the other day, I was in a scientific conference. I was attending a scientific conference. So I generally talk to scientists. So he was that particular scientist, Vikram Singh. He was he is a Nobel Prize winner, and he has given a theory of panspermia. And he was talking about Big Bang, and he said everything comes out of Big Bang. So one student, he has raised his hand and he asked, "My dear scientist sir, I want to ask a question." So, okay, fine, ask. So he said, "So can you please tell me who did this bang? Big Bang? Who did this bang?" You know what was the answer? This question is not allowed. Not allowed in science. What do you do with that? So this creation has to come from somewhere. Either you accept dead matter as beginning, or energy, whatever you like to say, or as an intelligent being. Something has to be the starting. And that's a matter of faith. You start with Big Bang, don't accept there's an intelligent being, or you start with intelligent being. That's not science. That is, you go in the realm of metaphysics. And in fact, there are footprints of God in this world if you look properly. If you read science, if you read science in a very unbiased way, you can understand there has to be God. For example, there was a big debate, intelligent design in America, evolution, intelligent design, and this was going on. But here's the problem: if this word has come out of random chances or whatever, what about information? That's a big thing. So what about a genetic code? I wrote a book on Science Fails to Explain Life. I've got that book here. So what about code in genes? What about that information? From where that information is coming? And that we don't have answers now. Information, semantic information which you can understand or decode. So there are signs of existence of an intelligent being. You want to look at it, you can find it. If you don't want to look at it, you'll not find it. That's why there was one philosopher, he said, you find that what you're looking for. That's what happens. That's life all about. So evidences are there, but interpretation of evidences are different. There are so many evidences. So there is, according to Gita, there is God. There is a divine being. We are His part and parcels, and He exists. And God, and He's independent. That's the definition of God. He's creator, maintainer, destroyer, and independent. We are dependent. There are many processes in our body which are not in our control. No, it's not in our control. Our heart is not in our control. Our liver is not in our control. So this shows that we are not the owner of this body. We are not the owners of this body. We are the owner of this body. We can control everything. But we cannot control everything. We are not the owner of this body. There has to be some other owner who is organizing things. You can say it's going by reflex, involuntary actions, but that's not explanation. Those are terms. You can say all these terms, but there's no big explanation for that. So there's God, and who is that God? There are many names of God, and that Bhagavad Gita says. And one of the name of God is Krishna, because Krishna means all attractive. That being has to be perfect, and he has to be all attractive, all knowledgeable, all name and fame. This is the definition of God, and that he is perfect in everything, in all aspects. That is God. Perfect in qualities, perfect in form, and perfect in his actions. So that is God. So now, having said this, third question: what is the aim of life? So having understood all these things, what should be the aim of life? That's why Upanishad says, Uttishta, Jagrata, Prape, Varan, Nibodhata. Awake. Awake and understand who are you and who is God. And why does they say awake? Because presently we are all sleeping. We are in a sleeping condition now. We think we are awake, but we are not awake. We are sleeping to reality. That is why Upanishad says, awake. At least do some research. You might not accept everything. That's okay. Everybody has their understanding. Everybody has questions. No problems. But don't neglect this topic. Don't lead your life as you are living. That's not justice. Don't say this is all wrong and bogus and nonsense. It's not like that. So many people have led their lives and studied these things, were interested in these things, have actually spent entire life in this. It's not, how can it be all wrong? It can't be wrong. So, if you're a real scientist, some research has to be done in that. No? You can't just leave it around like that. So, that's why it says awake, uttishta, jagrita. So, get up. Jagrita actually means awake. Get up, do some research, read Bhagavad Gita, spend some time. You don't have to spend your entire time like that. I know you are all busy people. Or you have made yourself busy. I don't know. That's another issue. But you're all busy. But fine, no problem. Get up in the morning, spend 10 minutes. 10 minutes everybody can do, no? Just spend 10 minutes. You don't have to rush to TV or your cup of coffee or whatever, No, starting of the day should be with good thoughts, with food for thought. You have to think properly. So, so you can get a copy of Bhagavad Gita and read that. I've also got some books. You can see those books. You can read those books. I've written some books to make this simple. What I'm explaining, I've written in those books to make it simple. Read that, and then Jagrita Prapya. Prapya means realize that. Don't just read that. We don't have to read books. We have to live them. People read them. People read books, but no, that doesn't suffice. You have to live them. People who try to understand books without following, they will never understand. People that try to follow those books, follow that philosophy, they will understand. People who actually first try to understand, they will never be able to follow it. So follow it, apply in your life. Then it's not necessary that you can apply everything in one day. That's not possible. Whatever is possible, slowly, steadily. You have to allow divine to work through you. Don't stop him. Don't stop that by your stupid actions, by wasting time in unnecessary things which is actually not required. There's a particular term for this in Sanskrit, anartha. We are spending time in those things which have absolutely no value, which doesn't add value to your life. No. So that is why there was one philosopher. He said television is not pastime. Television is kill time. He said this. It is killing your own time. So don't do all those things. So that is Prape Varan Nibodhata. Nibodhata means that Pratyakshavagamam Dharmayam. That's Bhagavad Gita says. Come face to face with divinity. You can do that. This life is not meant for suffering. We have created suffering for ourselves. We are so stupid. Without this knowledge, we are not meant to suffer. We are meant to be happy. We are made to be happy. We are made to be eternally happy, actually. But manashashtani indriyani prakritisthani karashyati. We have made our life so complicated. We have made our hearts so complicated that we are ending up in sufferings. That's all. Who is responsible? God? No. You are responsible, all of you. All of you. God makes perfect. Man spoils it. We spoil it. His instructions are simple. We divide it and make it so complicated. That's our problem. So that is Upanishad saying, and that is why Upanishads also say, if you don't try to understand this, if you say, okay, forget this, I am sitting here in this talk, I am bound to sit and let it finish and just wipe it off. That's all. I lead my life no matter how many people come and try to explain me. I'm going to listen. If you block yourself, then what's going to happen? Bhagavata says, 4th chapter, 40th verse, Agyascha shraddhanascha samshayatma vinashyati nasti sukham paroloke asamshayam sukham atmanam. Bhagavata says, anybody who tries to avoid these questions, who tries to avoid this knowledge, who doesn't have faith in this, who doesn't want to understand this, he will eventually be destroyed. Destroyed in the sense you will not have peace. Where there is no peace, there is no happiness. This is a beautiful concept in Bhagavad Gita. Now we say we are so happy. Okay, fine. Are you having peace? No, actually I don't have peace. I am full of anxiety. So then what is your happiness all about? How do you understand happiness if you are full of anxieties? Then that's not happiness. That is sensual excitement. That's all. That is very superficial experience of some excitement for some time, and it's all gone. So Krishna says, where there's no peace, there's no happiness. Where there's no happiness, there's no satisfaction. There's no question of satisfaction if you're not happy. So you ask anybody, are you happy? Yes. Are you satisfied? No. Is it? Nobody is satisfied. Are you having peace? No, exactly not. I have this problem, that problem. So what is the value of your happiness? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by your statement of happiness? This is an empty statement, that's all. So people who don't try to pursue this knowledge, they don't have peace, happiness and satisfaction in this life, neither in the next life. This is Bhagavad Gita saying. And if you do follow this knowledge properly, and if you try to understand this knowledge properly, if you try to understand Bhagavad Gita properly, this manual of life, and apply in your life, and allow divinity to enter, God to enter in your life, if you lead your life in such a way so that you can understand God, love Him, and try so that He loves you, there's a reciprocal relationship, then what's going to happen? Then Bhagavad Gita says that wherever there is Krishna or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this is the last verse of Bhagavad Gita, 18 chapter 78th verse. People might be knowing, Yatra Yogeshwaro Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara, Tatra Shri Vijayor Bhutir Nitir Mama. That means wherever there is Krishna, Master of all mystics, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna is one of the name of God, all attractive personality, the most compassionate, the well-wisher of all, and his guidance, his instructions, wherever they are, and wherever there is Arjuna or sincere devotees like him who are trying to understand the aim of life, trying to solve these questions, there will also be certainly opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality. That is the final opinion. This is the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Stop here. So, any questions anybody want to ask? And just 2 minutes and then we'll finish it off. Yeah.
So you are trying to tell us that there is a God.
Yeah.
Does he have any form or any smell or
that
we can find out that he is there?
Yeah, God is, in fact, according to most of the traditions, God is having form, but not like us. That's the point.
How we can attach to ourselves, which you call the Atma or soul.
Soul is also having a form.
Relationship with it.
How to make relationship with God? We have to first understand who is He. Full description of God. In fact, what's the description? So He's having a name, form, pastimes, a place, and that name, form, qualities, and pastimes. All these 4 things. Now, what's the description of that? Vedas also inform us exact distance of His abode. Exact distance, actually.
He is away from us. God is not with us.
He is away. He is far and He is close. That's the description of God, according to Upanishads. So I'll answer the question. So according to Upanishads, what is his name? I told you, he has many names. One of the name is Krishna. Krishna means all attractive. If God has so many qualities, he has to be attractive. What do you mean by he's having all qualities but he's not attractive? That has no meaning. So that is why we call him Krishna, or other names you can call. For example, Quran says 99 names, and Bible, there's so many names. In fact, English translation of Bible, they have translated God everywhere, but it's not like that. If you read in Hebrew original, there are many names. There are in fact 76 names of God, different names are mentioned in Bible. If you ask any Orthodox Christians, they'll tell you. I had a discussion with one of my friends. I was writing a book on that. So he has many names. Many names like he's the greatest, he's all merciful, he's compassionate. So there are names in Hebrew, there are names in Arabic, there are names in Sanskrit. And then these are the names, but all names are contained into this one name, Krishna. Because if he's greatest, if he's compassionate, if he's merciful, he has to be all attractive. Anybody who's most compassionate is attractive. Anybody is the greatest, he's attractive. So we like to call him Krishna. That's his name. His form is mentioned in scriptures. His form, you can go up and see him. That's the point. So that's his form. That is mentioned in scriptures. It is in Atharvaved. It is in Brahma Samhita. It is said, Benum Konantam Arvind Dalaya Taksham. No, actually she didn't finish the question. I don't know. So how do we come in contact with him? That's the question. And for that we have to do two things. Simple. First, we have to solve these questions. What I'm talking about. You have to understand them. Without solving these questions, no way we are advancing in spirituality. We are confused. We can't proceed. Confusion means darkness. Darkness, you can't proceed. No. So if you close your eyes, all of you close your eyes, what do you see inside? What's there? Darkness. So there's confusion. That is so you have to have this. You have to have this question solved. And second thing is we have to take his names. We need help. We need divine help. Without help, we'll not be able to continue this journey, which is actually inside. So that is why in all traditions they chant the names of God, and we need help, and that's called intuition or revelation or whatever.
So by chanting, we can find him.
Why not?
Just chanting, and
Though
not actually feeling
one
inside.
to those whom he wants to reveal, only he can find. Otherwise you can't find. But the answer is, to whom he will like to reveal himself. That's the question. Not he just take out some lottery and no, it's not a lottery system. You have to first deserve, then desire. That's the point. So we have to purify ourselves. We have to become perfect like him. We have to purify ourselves. We have to be free of all distractions. We have to be free of lust, anger, greed, this negative, evil tendencies which is spontaneous for all of us, in fact. And when we become absolutely pure, then you are qualified to actually come face to face with him. So for that we need to chant, we need to read and understand philosophy. Give time, actually.
So you think everybody is not trying to find him? I mean,
Everybody.
we are the part of Atma. We are Atmas, okay, and we are connected with him.
Yeah.
So there are different level of souls also.
We are lost now.
If you are trying to contact him, it depends on the person. Okay?
No, it depends on how much process we are going to follow. It depends on our sincerity.
So there is a certain process.
Yeah, chanting his names and reading Bhagavad Gita. And Bhagavad Gita gives a process. It's very scientific. There's a process. There are stages. You will come to know whether I'm proceeding or not proceeding. And I'm not going to discuss everything, but there are 9 stages. Adav Shraddha Tata Sadhu Sang Atha Bhajana Kriya Tatha Narth Nivritti Nishtha Ruchi Asakti Bhav and Prem. That to the love there are to the temple of God there are 9 steps. And it is all said in scriptures. It is all delineated logically and systematically. We have to read that, and then we'll advance slowly and steadily. That's all. I can't talk in details all those things. No. But, so that's why I'm requesting all of you, read this book. Spend time. Spend little time. Take out some time. That's the whole point of this lecture. Take out some time in your life. Don't give excuses.
My question is, what is the relationship between soul and God?
Relationship, we are part and parcels of God.
Relationship between soul and God.
What's the relationship between sunlight and sun? That's our relationship. That's all.
So that same characteristic as God.
Yeah, but minute. Same qualities, but minute form.
The higher Paramatma and Atma.
He's having infinite qualities. We have small qualities. Little. That's all. We are like that. Book.
I have a question. That when you said about 9 steps, the last one, if I hear you correctly, was again
Love.
framed.
Yeah.
Love. So Buddha also called about compassion, and that has to be generated, like you said, spirituality has to be practiced.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
Well, the first thing is we have to love somebody, You have to love somebody in this life. I mean, you can't remain without love. That's impossible. So either some person or your car, maybe yourself. And you love yourself now. Everybody loves himself now. There's nobody. You can spend entire time in front of a mirror and be happy. You like yourself? No? Everybody likes himself. So we love. We have to love. That's the nature of soul, to love. We can't live in void. But the question is, where to repose our love? That's the question. If you repose your love in this matter, you'll become matter. That's all. If you repose your love in flesh, you'll become flesh. If you repose your love in spirit, you'll become spirit. That's the point. So we have to channelize our love. And for channelizing love, we have to first understand what is that. Otherwise, why should I channelize my love there? I understand what is this, so okay, I love this. I understand this person, so I love him. Otherwise, why should I love him? So we have to first understand God, and then we start loving him. And when we start love is different from worship. It is very different from worship. In traditional Orthodox, ritualistic, you worship God. But it's not like that. Worship is for a few minutes. But love is with every breath. It is not with some items or something. You can also do with some items, but that's your entire life is love. That is love. And how can you understand love? You can understand love by love. That's the point. So you can understand how to love God by associating with people who love him. There is no other way. And that is why this lecture is there. That is why you have to associate with saints. And when you associate with them, then you understand, and you get that fire of love in your heart, which is transferred from those people to your heart. By books, only by books? No. You'll not be able to do it. It's not possible. So it's a whole package. Read Bhagavad Gita, chant names, associate with wise people, saintly people, and then we can hope against hope to actually being connected with divine. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. We need sincerity and dedication, and it's, I would say it is fun also. It is exciting. It is anything you do in the material world, it's boring. No, it's boring. Love of this material world will become boring after some time. Of this world, love is like that. It becomes boring after some time. But that doesn't. It doesn't. It's always fresh. I think that's a question, or I don't know.
No, you answered it.
That's the question.
That ultimately it is compassion for the whole unity, because everything is one. If you are
Yeah,
not
but
one.
yeah. So yeah, your logic is, yeah, I understand. So people talk about loving. In general, people talk about loving humanity without loving God. That's not possible. That's wrong. It's not possible. You can't do that. It is because first you have to understand everything is united with one source. And when you love that one source, then you love everybody. But if you try to love this is not love. You don't love this. If you try to love this, you don't love this. And that's so it's almost like watering leaves of a tree. Why do you want to do that? Water the root. Automatically everything has water. So that's the point. If you love that source, you love everybody. You love animals. You love plants. You start loving air, water, fire, ether, whole nature. That's your consciousness expands. That's the different thing. And then there's no enviousness. There's no anger. There's no greed. Okay, so can you give my books? Yeah, I just wanted to announce something. If there's no question, and then okay, last question. Just give me books. Yeah, you can ask me, and while the time being, he's just giving.
Okay. First of all, I'm very fortunate that I have attended this session. I learned a lot.
Okay, thank you. I'm also fortunate that you're all hearing. Thank you for hearing.
And one thing you have said over a period few times, that all knowledge came from Vedas. And Vedas they have said over and over one name, Om.
Yeah, that's the name of God.
Yeah,
another name of God.
Whom in English people translate as God, generator, organizer, destroyer. So, having said that, why we are just changing to Krishna? I mean, it's
no, it's no. I told you there are many names of God. I'll explain you. Om has a meaning. Om means, it's famous in Western word. Om. Om is Otam Protam Iti Om. That means Om is a name of God, which means He is present everywhere. Now, He is present everywhere doesn't mean that He is in your slippers and in this. It doesn't mean like that. The meaning of this is His energies are present everywhere. Without Him, nothing works. So for example, electricity of fire. Why fire? The heat in fire, the energy in fire, that's coming from God. Energy cannot not be destroyed, neither be created. So why energy is energy? Okay, that's a philosophical question, forget it. But no, that's a question. So all this, the characteristic of all the elements are coming from God. Why sugar is sweet, or after all, everything is molecules, no, but the characteristics are different. So this is, so in that sense, God is everywhere. Sunlight, air, these natural things. His divinity is there everywhere. So that's the meaning of Om. So self-realized person, who is self-realized, he can perceive God like this everywhere. And that is why it is said, it is very difficult to forget God. It seems very difficult to remember God now. But when you have knowledge, it's very difficult to forget Him, because everywhere you can feel His presence. And that's one of the names. But that's an official name. That is also said. Om. But it's a personal name, no? So we have all personal names, no? It's like my name is Keshav Anand, but my personal name may be Chintu, Mintu, or whatever. Whatever you can call. Or maybe in metal, Tom, Dick, Harry, personal name. So there is some personal name. So Krishna is personal name.
Thank you.
That like that.
Thank you so much.
So when we say Krishna, he likes personal name, no? Who you like your personal name or official name? Well, in office you like official name, but in your home you like personal name. So personal name signifies love. So people who worship God, they use Om. Or in yoga, Patanjali, they use Om, because it's a method of personal endeavor. That's worship. But in the path of love, you don't speak official name, because if you speak official name, love will reduce. No. So if you have a very beloved friend, and his name is Mr. What name? What should I say? Vipendra what? Okay, Mr. Vipendra Mishra. So, his name is Mr. Vipendra. Okay, fine.
Now ask him what he calls me.
Okay, yeah. What do you call him? Huh? Vips. Okay. So if he meets you and if he meets you daily and you tell him, Mr. Vipender, how are you? He will not feel. Come on, what happened to you? Have you gone mad or what? He'll say, come on, what happened to you? You have to address him by his nickname or whatever you have made, Vips or whatever. Vip, I don't know. So that you have to call. So in the path of love, you don't call official name. Your love reduces. So there are two paths. There are actually three paths in Vedas: Gyan Kand, Upasana Kand, and Karma Kand. They're all correct, but what is your goal? That depends. That is why we say Krishna, and then that is more pleasing to God. We don't say Om. You see? Understand? That's the point. Okay, so these are some books I have written. If you want to have a look, you can have a look. You can please read Bhagavad Gita. But in these books, I have explained so many questions you are asking. There have to be so many questions. I'm absolutely sure that you're not super convinced what I have told. Nobody can be super convinced in one lecture. My whole aim was to actually create inquisitiveness in you and probably inspire you to please do some research into all these things, and also to give this message: don't assume that you know things. That's a very bad tendency. Don't assume, especially people from India. It's like that. We tend to assume we know things, but it's not. Even if you know everything, still you should think, I know nothing. That's a sign of genius. Einstein said, I am collecting pebbles on the shore of an ocean. And his assistant, he said, I know everything. That's a sign of foolishness. So, we have to spend life learning things. No day should be wasted without learning something.
If I may indulge you for just one more thing.
Yeah.
That in Vedic culture, they always end up when it is prayer or anything, like Sarve Bhavantu Sukhi.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak about that why is it true in Vedic culture only, that in every prayer, it's all about the whole universe, not just about yourself?
Because, you understood the question?
No.
Vedic culture, in Vedic culture in the East, it's a norm, it's a tradition to pray in the beginning and in the end. And what do you pray? You pray for everybody. Sarve Sukhina Bhavantu, Sarve Santu Niram. Let everybody become happy. In the end we pray. We don't pray for ourselves. That's a tradition. So his question is, why is like that? Why is like that? So it's like that because a self-realized person who is self-realized, is connected with God, he doesn't feel himself separate from anybody. And that's Vasudeve Kutumbikam. This word, the entire word is house of God. And everybody is related to me. So it's natural to actually pray for everybody. Praying for yourself is selfishness. That's also a negative feeling. It's selfishness. Not praying for real self-realized person. He'll not pray for himself. He'll pray for others. That's a self-realized soul. He'll always pray for others. He'll not pray for himself because you know, when you pray for others, when you try to pray for others, then you automatically benefited. Just this example is given in mirror. In mirror, you decorate your reflection, no? Reflection. And in the process of decorating reflection, what happens? Who becomes decorated? You. That's the process. So that's the idea. That is why if we can get rid of selfishness, then we are close to God, much closer to Him.
And you are not different from others. Everything is same.
Everything is same, yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
The whole world.
We all spirit soul, yeah. That's true. Yeah. So it's so nice to pray for others, no? It's so bad feeling to pray for oneself. I don't feel good to pray for myself. If you live, what word is going to get benefited by your life? What's a big deal? Even if you die, what's a big deal? This word will keep on going now. So, you know that lizard, you know lizard? Lizard?
Yeah.
So it goes on the roof. And you know what lizard is thinking? If I leave the roof, it will fall down. That's what lizard is thinking. So it is thinking, I am supporting the roof. So that's not the fact. So we all think like this. This is a disease. This is what we have to rectify. Thinking about oneself. That's the root cause of our being away from God. That's a root cause. So that is why people who come to temple or they worship or wherever they worship, whatever they do, it's all just self-centered. And the more you are self-centered, the more away you are from God. 100%. So you have to annihilate your ego. That's the term, ego, that's all. And then, so prayer is also not for oneself. That's a beautiful concept. That is love. That's it.
Very good answer.
Okay, so here are my books, by the way. I've written these books just, we have so many questions, so if all these questions I've tried to answer in these books. If anybody wants to have a look, they can have a look on these books. There's one book, Science Fails to Explain Life. I was talking about genetics. I myself was doing research in genetics as I was a doctor and a scientist. So I've written a book, Science Fails to Explain Life. This book will actually give you a shock as it gave to me while I was doing research. Most of the things in genetics are weird. They're changing. They're becoming more complex. And genetics is a proof. On the contrary, what scientists like to think that genetics show that there's no God. Actually, it shows that there is a divine intelligent being there out there. How it is like that? How these books give the history, not just the logic. How things developed from Claude Shannon, information theory, and all these things. Concept of genes, and then how philosophy came in that, and how things are changing in present day science, and how there's how we can conclude that there's interference of God. And all these things. So this book is there, Science Fails to Explain Life. And this is one book, Crazy Ideas. I named this book because I think ideas are crazy, So there's so many questions. There are questions and answers in these books. Simple questions. Who am I? Who is God? Why should I believe in God? Why should I believe in soul? Why should I do all these things? What's the logic of this? All those questions, whatever I could collect. So these are there. And this is one book for you asking what are the steps in devotion. So those 9 steps of how to approach God, how to love God. How can you know whether you're advancing or not advancing? Are you shooting arrows in darkness? Is it all abstract experience? No. So all these things are mentioned in this book, and these are my lectures here in this pen drive. So anybody wants to have a look, they can have. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. And I like the fact when he said